This meeting is being conducted in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. The schedule was sent to the Verona City Book Times, the Star Ledger, the Herald News, and the Township of Verona, and the Verona Education Association. Postings of this meeting setting forth the time, location, and agenda were posted in each of Verona's 6 schools, the board office, and town hall. This posting was also sent to the newspapers, all SC presidents, and SCA liaisons. The Verona Board of Education operates under a consent agenda format. Any board member has a right to have an item pulled to be voted upon or discussed separately. Copies of today's agendas have been made available to the public present. Mr. Day?
There's no
Mr.
copies
Sparta?
here.
Mr. Molina?
Here.
Mr. Yunus?
Here.
Mr. Quattrochi?
Here. Okay, we have a special meeting that we called for today because we have our regularly scheduled meeting on Tuesday night, the 28th, day of tomorrow, to finalize precisely what components of the project around repairing our buildings and fields are going to be included in the question and how the question would be framed, etc. So we'll open it up. Mr. Forte has prepared a substantial document here for the board that I think should be all information we've seen already, right? There's nothing in here that's new except for page 3, right? You want to lead us through that if you think that that's relevant to the conversation.
I'd be happy to. If you'd like to start from the first page, you feel confident with some of the stuff that we had. We went over the first 2 pages on January 7th. Pretty confident with that? This is something you're just seeing for the first time. One of our parents who's on our security committee took a walk around the buildings also with our buildings and grounds director, Mr. McDevitt, and he made some recommendations. Most of them are in line with the preliminary recommendations from our security firm that we hired. So if you look at them, the underlying comments are my notes after conferring and asking for more clarification from Mr. McDevitt and also from Mr. Caruso. Would you like to go through each individual one? You have questions on any of it?
Well, we just got handed this, so I'm not sure. It's 3 pages of notes. I'm not sure how we'd have a question, not having read it, but can you summarize, is there anything in here that is relevant to making a decision on the referendum question, or are these things that are already covered in there or out of scope?
But most of them are either covered in there, or we are doing it another way. So in other words, if it might not be a referendum issue. I even wrote some of it's like behavior. So if you look at the last page, see how I kept writing behavior. You know, those don't really have anything to do with security in terms of a referendum. It's more about just changing behavior of staff, like empowering staff to think during a crisis. That's not a referendum issue. It is something that we started to do, and we are looking at considering this new method that he is talking about that I've been trained in also. It's called run, hide, fight, but that's just things that you would do to change behavior, not necessarily a referendum issue. But so if you want to look through these here, the first thing he talks about is that we should have protective film over the glass. That's in the referendum. Second thing is this other way of locking doors.
Sorry, can I interrupt 1 second? It says interior doors. Are we holding?
Oh, I'm sorry, yep. I skipped something, because the exterior doors are in here too. So interior doors should be outfitted with the film. So I wrote exterior doors and windows will be done in the referendum. In interior, we're planning on doing via the budget. Or it's possible we might be able to move some of the money into the interior doors as well. Doors should have an alternate way of locking, such as a push button, things like that. We are using these things that are foam bumpers. It's kind of in a U shape that goes on the door, and you can keep the door locked, but it doesn't close so that the kids can come in and out. If there was a lockdown situation, the teacher can pull the foam bumper off and the door closes. There's a similar thing that's done with a magnet. It's made by a place called Master Grinding in New Jersey. And it's a little magnet that slides in, I guess, in the door jamb, right, Paul? And it blocks the locking mechanism from latching. and then you just pull that out. So it's the same kind of idea. And then also, one thing that Mr. McDonough had told me is that anytime we replace a door, or the hardware on a door, when it breaks, he replaces it with a lock just like this, with a push button system. The shades, we have this covered. They're not all shades that you pull down, like on that door right there. If you see that door has a shade on it, but there's a way to cover the doors, the windows on the doors. In other words, there's either a piece of firm cardboard that slides over it, or paper or something like that. Due to fire codes, we can't leave those kinds of things up, so we have to take it down, put them up during a lockdown. There's also other code. You're not supposed to have those on the doors that go to the hallway, because if the shade is down, you don't see who's out there, the door opens into the hallway and you hit somebody with the door. So there is some building code issues with the shades also, right?
Yeah, plus the PD wants you to know the call viewing down for a week, the PD wants to be able to see.
Right. Right, exactly, that's why. So that issue we're working on. It also wouldn't be a referendum issue because it's a minor cost. He talked about these ballistic panels. He's not recommending that. Then the basement windows, all lower windows should be outfitted with protective film. That's in the referendum. When I say in the referendum, it's in the planned referendum that I proposed to you. Also, a way to allow sunlight in, that's something we can consider when we move along. That would just be a tinting of the window. That wouldn't be a big difference. He recommended 10 feet or above that you would have the protective film. The engineers were going by the manufacturer, and their recommendation is 6 feet. That's in the referendum. Exterior doors would have the film on the exterior door. That's in the referendum. The swipe card access, I spoke to him about this, and he clarified this. He doesn't mean on all doors, because we want to limit the amount of people coming in and out, even staff. We don't want them all coming in all different ways. So he did, in his notes, he wrote all doors, but he meant all doors that we use currently, and that's in the referendum. The security sensors, this is not currently in the referendum, but Mr. McDevitt and I discussed that we feel that we could put the type that Mr. Spardell talked about, which would be a loud buzzing mechanism on some of the problematic doors, like you see sometimes with a push button, like a panic bar for fire, and if it opened up, it would make a loud noise. It's another behavior thing. You'd have to change behavior of leaving those doors open.
No, do we have a ballpark on how much it would cost?
No, we don't. We didn't put that. We had a cost for how much it would have done it to do it electronically, but that was tied in with all the cameras. If we were going with 260 cameras, we had some of that. So the wiring was included. We don't have a ballpark estimate, but Mr. McDevitt's fairly confident that we could address the problematic doors. He knows some of them. You know, we could do it over a course of the next few years. Put some panic bars on there that would keep those doors have some kind of a loud alarm sound that people can hear. This intercom system, the high school will have new phones, and there will be some way for the high school to do just what he's saying, that each room should be able to call a lockdown from the room rather than having to call the office. But having totally redoing all the intercoms in the district is not currently in the plan. It is something we could address slowly as we move on in the budget process, but it's not currently in the referendum plan. Principal's office is identified. This should be that the principal's office is identified as lockdown. Should have the capability of communication with the rest of the school via intercom. That we do have the ability to do that. This number 3 is again goes back to number 1. So I mean number E1. So it's not it's not in the referendum. The teacher's desk should face the door. That's behavior. Each classroom should have the ability to put the school in lockdown using a 2-way intercom system. That's not in the referendum. We do have the ability for the teachers, though, to call the main office now. That's how we do it now. Each classroom should have an outside communication with 911 via hardline. That's not in the plan. That would be actually putting a telephone in each classroom that would have the ability to go outside. And then we are addressing some of these issues inside, like for example, this setup here for a lockdown, by putting the ballistic glass, the film on there. There's a little change at Forest in the fencing that he recommended that we would do. This other stuff is about an app that wouldn't be in the referendum. We agree with it. It's good, all good ideas, things to investigate. The rest of it's behavior. The rest of the whole thing is just behavior of staff. In other
The
words,
one says, Jay says, the smartphone app that would turn ordinary smartphones into effective emergency alerting devices, right? Automatic text.
right.
But then it says, but then L says banning cell phone use. Is the app staff app? Is that-
Yes,
is
it's
that
staff.
what it
So
is?
it would be a staff app and then banning the cell phone use.
Banning cell phone use by
Students.
students.
That all that stuff is behavior and wouldn't affect the referendum. The next page is from the presentation that I did to the public on January 14th. I know everybody was given this already, and some of you were there to see it. Go through it. If you have questions about it, feel free to ask. If not, I'll just keep spinning the pages all the way to the back where you get, there's an Excel spreadsheet that says what the results of the survey was. And pretty much, it came back, nine people said we should do the upper field, 19 said do the lower, and 3 said try to do some form of a plan 3. You can see the comments. And then the rest of this is those worksheets that you've had already, and the French Perillo quote that you've had also. For the last page, the French Perillo quote is to do the remedial part of the project at the upper field by eliminating the environmental problems that we're having, as well as fixing up our tennis courts, fixing up the parking lot, doing the retaining wall, doing everything except building a new field, basically. And the quote price on the bottom is, you see that the reason why I put down the 10% fees is because the way French Perillo gives it to you, they don't include the fees, and so it'd be another $151,000 for that. So you're looking at about $1.9 million.
But this, we received 2 plans previous to this, for the upper field and the lower.
Right.
This portion of it is included in both of those.
It's kind of a, right, Paul, there's some of the things were pulled out. Can you answer that?
Sure. So Joe, the question is, what portion of this is included in the other 2 fields?
We have 2 plans before, we have Plan A, upper field, and Plan B, lower field. One is about 4.5, the other one is about 5.4.
Right.
This is included in that?
The items included in this cost estimate are already included in those other cost estimates for the upper or lower field options. This one strictly looks at the remediation aspect. If we were only to do the remediation, the environmental remediation,
And not do any field work at all.
Right, correct.
But if we were going to do field work, this is included in both of them.
Correct. Basically, this just breaks out the items that would need to be done from a remediation standpoint. And then it addresses the areas on the north side of Sampson with regards to the tennis court. The additional tennis court is something that we're saying is a good idea to do right now. It's not required for remediation. It's something we'd ask for. It takes care of a remediation aspect, in terms of dealing with the ground that's contaminated on that side of Sampson, but it's not a requirement.
Paul, quick to clarify, if you do a remediation, I believe part of the field is usable, which I was told 50-60%. What is your take on what percentage of that
Yeah.
upper field is usable?
I mean, when I look at the conceptual plan that French Perillo provided us, Jim, I would call it about 60% of the property. I believe you received that conceptual plan, so when you look at it, it's essentially from the middle of the football field as it stands now towards that eastern slope, and then from either end, it kind of, closes in with fencing, but then a large portion of the property still remains usable.
So this So this $1.9 million number includes about 300,000, roughly, it's items G through M, right, that are not related to the upper field, right? That's the, so the 1.9 million, so this 1.9 million is actually two sets of numbers. It's fixed, it's secure the upper, I'll use the word secure the upper field, not fix it, because in my head, fixing it means you have a brand new upper field. Securing it is securing off the area that's got the problematic fill and all of that, right? You have
Yeah, the
60%
structural
fill.
deficits, I mean, that's the reason we would need the fencing. This remediation plan would address the environmental contamination.
Yep.
With the soil cap, but the structural deficits would still be in place, so that would necessitate the fencing.
And about 60% of the field we would be able to use for PE
Phys ed
classes
or
or practices and that kind of stuff, right? So the $1.9 million is really $1.6 million,
Correct.
right? Because it's 300K for the tennis courts, parking lot, lights, fences, etc.
That's correct, John.
Okay.
But there's one, I guess there'd be one thing though, is that if we did eliminate the lot and the park and the tennis court, we'd have to increase the amount of fill most likely, because we have to cap that area.
Yeah, there'd be a deduct on those hardscapes, but then, you know, there'd be some cost added back in for soil remediation.
Right. So the plan was the tennis court and the lot would actually act as a cap, instead of just putting
For the far corner of the forest. Far corner, right, okay.
And I thought as part of the plan, I mean, the tennis courts, I've been to the tennis courts, and they're all cracked, and they need some help. As part of the plan, I was assuming, or I was thinking that would be something that we would plan in continuing, so I guess that's why we're going to talk about today. So.
Yeah, I'm just separating them into
Yeah.
which components of it are to fix the tennis courts and which components are to deal with the field. Okay, so in terms of the technology, just if you look at the very first page, you get a summary that we went through on the 7th. The technology, security, the building repairs, et cetera, anything except the fields. Is it safe to say that we're in agreement to move forward on that part of the thing, and the dialogue is really about the fields, or is there any question about anything other than the field that we can knock out?
I could say one question on these items that Rob identified as some things that would be potentially useful from a security standpoint. Is it, one, do we have any flexibility in what we've already approved so far to present to the state and to put on referendum? Do we have any latitude is there any money to fund those if we decide that it makes sense, or do we have to decide now? Or do we just say, thanks for the recommendation, we'll have to do it another time?
That's a good question. The application to the state included the security part. I guess if I was going to answer that, we're probably going to be guessing. Do you know more than me with this?
I can't say definitively how much latitude there is. I think there is a certain amount of latitude, and I think that there's also, you know, the contingencies that have been built into the other projects. I think some of that money could be reallocated towards these security items, since there is a lot of overlap between the projects. Of, you know, how security is specified as a building improvement as opposed to another item like exterior doors as an example. There is crossover there. So say, you know, there's more money allocated to exterior doors than what's actually necessary to replace those doors, then some of that money can be reallocated towards additional window fill and that type of thing for interior doors. The problem, you know, like Steve said, I went through with Mr. Caruso for the district. I think he made a lot of excellent recommendations, but there's some challenges financially and just to the physical condition of the buildings, like you know, interior doors was something that I was targeting for a referendum 5 years down the road, or, you know, the next evolution of building improvements. You know, we've got original interior doors in many of the schools, especially at the elementaries, where you're talking about single-plated glass, you know, original wooden doors that, you know, any one of us could probably just walk up to and kick in. So I don't know if the film is necessarily adding much protection necessarily. it's a good idea on the doors that have already been replaced, where you have a limited viewing panel, the doors, a solid core door where it's very structurally sound. So in that case, it makes sense to do, but to apply it to a door that's existing, that's 50 to 80 years old, where the door needs replacement in general, I don't know if it necessarily makes sense to apply the film in those cases.
And the context of my question was, and he didn't really include any prioritization or any kind of quantitative recommendations on what we should do, what would be nice to do. Because intuitively, it seems like the intercom system would be the most impactful. Again, I'm not an expert in it, but and I don't know what that would cost. But that, to me, that seems to be the thing that stands out, at least to me, that the stuff he would have recommended was in the plan, if not in the plan. Then would we have the latitude to do anything around that? I don't know how expensive those systems are. That communication seems to be something that there's a kind of a thread of communication in here that it was seemingly absent in our, other than just in upgrading the intercom system, right?
I think what we're saying here is that there's a lot of other things we could do, and that's probably something that is a good idea. It just wasn't in the original plan, and we came up with what we thought was a sustainable plan that we could sell to the board and the public. It's about $900,000. In there are some upgrades to our intercoms, like the high school, and yeah, I'd like to do the other thing, but you have to vote on it Tuesday, and we're not gonna have a vote for you by then.
Okay.
So I think it's kind of, it's evolving, and I do think it's something, it's not thing, I know it's something on Paul's 5-year plan is to do those kinds of things, to upgrade the intercoms.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Any other questions on the technology, security, or building projects? Okay, so I just have two general questions before we go into the fields, and that's there was when we sent out the rod letters during the week, and I added them up, they didn't total the right total, and we went back to the state, if I'm not mistaken, there was a problem with the high school rod letter that we got, right?
For some reason, they didn't give us any money, but it was all eligible.
Right.
So they gave us like 500,000 more than that.
So we have all the letters that we need for 100
We actually get $5 more too.
That's $5.
$5 more than what we originally thought.
But the $3.5 million number is not a good number, and then we have everything documented that has to go to 100 to do that, right?
Yes, she's got all of it. Yep,
She's got it.
she's got it all. She'll have to word the referendum question that you guys decide.
And the second question on the aid, the rod aid, is the rod aid is all, none of the field stuff that we're talking about, including the tennis courts, parking lot lights and all of that, none of the field options have any dependence on the rods.
Nothing.
Right, so whatever we decide on the fields is independent of rod.
Correct.
We get the 3.5 for all the other money, some subset of the other, right?
Yes, you're right. Some of the stuff wasn't eligible. There's $3.5 million for the rest of that project.
And then lastly, when it comes to alternates, just so we're all clear, so by definition, we have to document our alternates to the state. Right? We can't put in alternates after the fact. They have to be framed up front in our documentation.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that.
So,
What do we have to do with the state now? Not be ready to state. They've done with us.
no, the state, everything we need to file to the state is be filed. But the question is, if we ran under budget on a particular aspect of things, right, and we wanted to do, for example, the intercoms, you have enough money to do that, could you just do that, or does it have to be listed somewhere in order to justify
It
it?
depends on how the question or the applications to the state were worded. If it just says communications is part of one of the ROD grants, then communications could be anything. Communications could be your intercom, communications could be a number of other things. So it depends on how defined we were in the applications to get the ROD grant. But if you come up with alternatives that all fit into communications, you can drop out some communications and add other communications.
Right.
Now,
That's exactly what they told
but
us.
if we put in ads, if we put in ads that don't fit, doesn't mean we can't do it. It just means the state's not going to give us any money for it. So so we want to be careful what we delete. We may be deleting something that carries a bit of money with it, and replace it with something we might not get money with.
Right.
But if your terminology is correct, your nomenclature is nebulous enough that communication can fit a number of different things, you still get away with that.
Right, so that documentation is not in the binder?
Oh, it is there, and it's not written that way. It's very specific. It doesn't say intercom systems.
Yeah, but I'll just jump in. I think where we gain some leeway, John, is the technology aspect, because there's technology included in every building. And if we were to prioritize or, introduce late in the game, the idea of upgrading phone systems, we'd be looking at doing like an IP type system. So technology kind of covers us in that regard, I would think.
Well, it doesn't, it spells out what the technology is also. It spells out servers and storage.
Right, I think your point is, I think Paul's point is that if a server was for the phone system, as opposed to a data server, it's still a server. But I
We'll
think,
find that out.
yeah, I think so the question I have sounds like it's a sort of an open question going forward, is as we go through this, to the extent that there are things that, like the security audit, we haven't gotten back yet, right? So if the security audit uncovers something that we do want to prioritize, and that becomes an alternate, that we remain clear on where we can substitute and where we can't, right? Okay, so let's open it up then to conversation about the field. So the presentation that Mr. Forte had here had three choices. One was to fully remediate the upper field, remediate, I'm sorry, not remediate, but enhance the lower field. And the third choice is to just do the minimum, which is the 1.6 million number. And then the recommendation is to, with that, in any of the scenarios, we would be talking to tennis courts and parking lot and lights up here at the back lot as well, right? So the question is that the choices that we have here are do the upper field, do the lower field, do a remediation of the upper field, which is the 60% still can be used option, along with the tennis courts, et cetera. And defer turfing and lighting of the athletic facility to some other time. Those are our three choices.
Yes.
Okay. Does anybody on the board have any particular opinion one way or the other? Or is there a particular recommendation that we have that we're working with as a basic recommendation? I know that the upper field has been the leading recommended way to go for some time.
What I've said in the meetings that the Buildings and Grounds Committee has had over the last month is we can sit here and discuss all day what each of us thinks is the best way to spend the money or best way to fix the problem. What I say is just give them the choice, give the voters the choice. And the suggestion was, again, with two questions. The first question, including the cost of remediating and rehabilitating the upper field, along with everything else. And the second question being an add-on and of about $700,000, which would implement Plan B and supplement Plan A, and give the voters a choice. I mean, we gave them the choice the other day when we had that meeting at HBW, and even though it was the majority said upper field, there was still 1/3 of the people said lower field. I'm sorry, the other way around. 1/3 said upper field, 2/3 said lower field. So there's still a question out there, and I don't think it's the no-brainer that's been set to bid. And if we just give them the choice, they can vote for question A, which would be upper field, and no on B, or yes on A and yes on B, in which case it would be the lower field. Or if they don't want to vote for anything related to sports, then they can vote no, and then the whole thing would have to. So that's my suggestion, is to give them the choice. A, plan B, or they can vote the whole thing down. I'm certainly not in favor of anything, any extra questions or more questions that would give them any greater choice than that. And it's not consistent with other referendum have questions that have been liked in other districts. So again, that was my suggestion way back to the Buildings and Grounds Committee about a month or so ago.
I'll make a comment, please. Thanks for that, Joe. I'd like to, as you know, I'm new to the board. I came onto this board to make a difference, and to me, this referendum is a difference maker. I look at it as 4 parts. You know, the technologies, the security, the building improvements in the fields. And to me, you know, they all have important aspects. But to me, the main thing is you know, when I talk about people technology-wise, we don't have Wi-Fi. You know, or we have backup servers and our main servers in the same room. You know, we need to get this done. We have a heating system in the high school, which is on its last legs. We have to get that fixed. We have building maintenance items that have to be done, ceiling tiles falling off the ceiling. There's things, I mean, there's a lot of great things in the schools, a lot of things are being done all the time. But these 3 items, the technology, security, building improvements, to me are key. I go into Forest Avenue School, I walk in there, and they have, you walk by classroom before you get to the office. To me, those things have to be fixed. So last thing on the list, and I'm going to talk about fields, you have the fields. And to me, when I was thinking about the fields, doing the analysis, I polled people, I talked to the town council, mayor. It's a tough decision. I mean, in one respect, I have kids that play soccer. They play baseball. They play lacrosse. And it's great to have as many fields as possible in this town. But I think, as you all know, we have the hilltop. The town's working with the hilltop. They're going to have all those fields. We have a lot of fields out already. There's other fields we can turf and not turf. The bottom line is we have to make a decision. Initially, I was leaning toward doing the lower field and saying, you know, we get 3 times the space in the upper field. You get all these extra fields, all-purpose fields, everybody can use. But there's a cost to that. There's also a cost to the hilltop. And there's also a cost to maybe not getting a referendum passed. If we put a field on this referendum, that could derail the other 3 components, which I find very critical also. And so when you talk about the options, you have lower field, upper field, and to me you have option 3, which is maybe not have the fields on this particular referendum, work with the town, talk about it, look at various options, maybe put in some bleachers on the lower field and use it as a grass field, so we can put bleachers up there with the press box as an option. Again, I think, you know, you have to look at the big picture and say, what can we do to get the main items of the referendum passed? And if the hilltop, you know, the hilltop comes through, you're going to have another full football field up there. You'll have Centennial. Again, I did talk to some of the town folks and say, we could use the Centennial field, maybe, or the hilltop fields for high school future in the future, high school field in the future. When you think about it, high school football, maybe 6 games, 7 games a season. But the idea is to have all the fields be all-purpose for all the different sports to be able to use. So again, I just want to throw my 2 cents out there, and you know, again, I was leaning initially toward option 2, which is the lower level, lower fields, and now I'm sort of torn between pulling the fields all together out of the referendum.
So, Jim, so when you say pulling it all together, what about the remediation?
Yeah, no, and I apologize, John, yes, you are correct. I know we have to do the remediation, so my idea, when I say option 3 was to remediate the upper field. I think we should do the tennis courts and the parking lot. As I mentioned before, the tennis courts probably got to need a replacement. I think the 5th tennis court is important because it actually allows us to do, I believe, at various county events, to have tennis tournaments at our school, which I think is very important. And also you have to remediate that area anyway, so to make additional parking spots for the school would be beneficial.
So I want to paraphrase what you said. So you're saying secure the upper field, that's with the tennis courts and right? That's the 1.9. That's the 1.9 million.
Correct.
Right. And you're saying, and bleachers and press box for the lower field, because we're gonna need that, if we don't fix the lower field, we need to come up with something again.
I mean, it's a great grass field, I mean, and maybe it's not gonna be turf temporarily, but, I mean, if you have Centennial and you have the Hilltop, and if we could make that into put in the bleachers and press box as an option, that could be used as a football field going forward, if you line it correctly, it could be an all-purpose field, as a grass field temporarily, and then maybe in the future, working together as a town, as the Board of Ed and the town together, with the community, we can hopefully get turf down there in the future.
Do we have costs for bleachers and press box for the lower field?
Yes.
They're listed on the quotes for.
Not in the packet I gave you today, but it is in there. It's, if you were gonna replace, you have your home bleachers, you have your home side bleachers for the lower field, we're estimated at $350,000, and some portable bleachers for the visiting side, which was, you could just say it's about $350,000.
That's for one side.
Yeah, portable bleachers are $20,000. So you'd have permanent bleachers. So if you picture the hill now, the hill would be remediated. There would be a tiered retaining wall with the bleachers built into it, with portable bleachers for the visitor side. So you'd have permanent home side bleachers, portable bleachers on the visitor side. You could move on wheels. That's the plan if you were going to do the lower field.
So that's D and E on this,
Yeah. That's in your binders. It's from December 30th from French Pro for the lower field costs.
Sense how much seating that is that 1,200?
Total. 1,200 plus the visitor side, which was it's another 300 people or something.
So it's about 1,500. It's 1,200 on the home side.
Right.
So it's 1,500. What is it? You know what the high school is now?
1,200 on the home side.
Right, so Jim, what you're suggesting would be, let's call it 1.9 million plus 370, right? 2.270.
Does that seem feasible, Mr. McDevitt? That we could even do that? Like do the remedial part and then do the stadium first, without doing the rest of the work. It seems like a good idea.
I think it's doable, I don't think it's a question of whether it can be done or not. It's just, is that, because once you do that, you're committing to that as your plan for the future, field design. So, yeah, just give that consideration before you commit to it, obviously.
I think one thing to add was the baseball cement bleachers that are there that were sort of crumbling. I think that was in the initial report. I think it was like 35,000 if I remember. Yeah, so that was, I think that was going to be done as part of the lower field anyway. I think that's something that we should maybe keep in there just because that needs to be done to make that a viable baseball stadium.
So that's a line item S, like Sam, right, 35,000. So that's about 2.3, I'm not there about the exact number, it's roughly 2.3 million. Okay. Let's do opinions, anybody else? All right,
What's the recommendation from the administration, Steve?
It's a tough one because of all the things that are coming together at the same time. My original thought was when this whole thing happened immediately, my original thought was to do a lower field. And then we switched back to do the upper field. The lower field part for me is a problem, obviously, is the sustainability piece and how we're gonna maintain it in 10, 12 years, replace it. So the one option I don't think we should do is nothing. I think the 1.9 plus those little pieces in there that add up to, what was that approximately?
About 2.3 million.
About 2.3 million would remediate, that would be the total. Give you bleachers downstairs, down below, that you're now, but you are committing to the lower field, and you're now saying the upper field will not be a field anymore. But I think the other 1.9 is doing that anyway. And doing our tennis courts, and because to me, it makes a lot more sense to make use of that land instead of just putting more dirt on top of it. So add a tennis court, add a parking lot, and do the remedial part, and get rid of the fact that we have a DEP contaminated site now. So, yeah, I think that given all the things that are coming together, and it might be a good first step to now having the lower field turf at a later date, maybe with the help of the township, because that's out there now too. So, yeah, I'm comfortable with that idea that we do the remedial part and the other pieces. I think that's a good idea.
I believe that remediating the upper field would not be the most responsible decision, just given the cost to it and what we get back from it. And that if we were to Joe's point, put two options on the referendum, that it should be between the lower field and option 3. With that said, though, I also feel that there is a strong relationship with the town, having been at the meeting with Steve, that even given option 3 with 1.9 million, we will have time and purpose to plan for the future for that lower field. And I know that we're going to have to, and I say no, that's a pretty strong word, because there's just no way we're going to fit every single athletics event at Hilltop. We just haven't planned for every single event to be there, and so the lower field will have to be utilized to some point. And so if this board were to decide to do an alternative, I would say leave the upper field off, but I would support option 3, which is 1.9 million, and we discussed the add-ons. I'm a little hesitant to commit to what the field design would be before collaborating with the town as to what that might look like. And once again, the town is not committed to doing the lower field, but we've had a history of support and working together on fields in the past. So I don't see that as being something that would discontinue in the future. So once again, I would say option 3 would be the most viable opportunity for us. And just to echo, Jim's point, we have to do something, right? We can't leave the schools the way they are right now. And I just feel that the responsibility is on, the onus is on us to ensure that this does pass. Because I don't want to wake up the next day after the referendum and say, well, I did my best. When I really didn't, and I put something before the town that I knew had an opportunity not to pass. But I think it's very difficult to say we put 1.9 million forward of things that needed to be done nonetheless. And even if that got voted down, you're still going to have to spend that 300,000 and such to cap and secure that field, right? So it's really lean, and it's really, to the point, thought out and purposeful as a referendum and as a whole.
The one thing I would point out about if we, so to any question about why are we trying to get this done in March, the original date was to do it in January, then we fell behind to the spring and the summer and the fall to hit the January date, and the next available date is March. And if we don't call for a public vote in March, or if it fails in March and we say, well, we learned lessons and we're going to go back and put it for vote again, the next available date for us would be September. I spoke to Matt Sweeney, who's the bond, one of the bond advisors on this. The change in interest rates for our 20-year bond from last March to this March, so just the 1 year that it's transpired, is costing us $2.2 million more in interest on the 20 years. That's how much the interest rates have moved. If we had done this in January, the month of January, so we had done a vote in the January cycle, and I'm not quite sure what date it would have been in January, but using the January rate versus the forecasted rate for March. And again, I use the word specifically, it's a forecast rate, because if anybody knows what interest rates are gonna be, we wouldn't be sitting here volunteering time for the Board of Ed, we'd be on some boat somewhere. But the difference between the January actual rate for referendum was done in January the month we're in right now, versus the forecasted rate for March, is $325,000 difference in interest. Okay, well, and again, it's over 20 years, so it's not a lot per year, but it ends up to a nice chunk of money. So when we throw around the terms, I think it's important we recognize that unless you think interest rates are going to go down by September, there's a risk of it's costing a lot more money by September than it was now. Okay, so, all right, so we got, so my personal view is the township, you know, in all the dialogue we've had with the township, both on a formal sense and informal sense with just about everybody involved, the township side is going forward with Hilltop. There should be no question about that at this point. We've had dialogue. I can tell you, Joe Polino and I have been on the board for 11 years. I know that over those 11 years, we've worked with May Tour, we've worked with May Snikowski, we've worked with May Sapienza, and now Mayor Manley. We've gone through this. I can't describe how many times, so no, people should have in their heads no question that we've had the dialogue to try to figure out the best way forward for the town in a way that everyone can agree. The end result of that is the township is moving forward with Hilltop by the best indications that we have from endless conversations over the last couple of weeks, certainly. I think it's fair to say that there is no near-term funding coming from the town to the Board of Ed. What I mean by the definition of near-term, I mean as it would impact this vote for these field issues right now. Right now, whether it is something that we can work out collectively for the town of Verona in a year, that's probably as good a guess of what would happen in the future, but not at this time. The Hilltop property at current schedule is aimed to be ready for business in the spring of 2015, so it'll be a year out from this spring. Which means, best case, and that field from speaking to Mr. Martin and from all of the council members, you know, it is all considered community property as the Board of Ed property is, and to the extent that we can move sports and athletics up there, we could. From going through the sports programs that we have versus the space that's going to be built at Hilltop, the current plan at Hilltop includes a regulation sized multi-purpose field. And I'm going to use these words very carefully because there was some confusion. I did get a number of phone calls about this, and just so we're hearing it the same way. Centennial Field is regulation-sized soccer and football. So a regulation soccer field is wider than football. Okay, Centennial is a regulation-sized field for soccer. The other 95% of fields in the state of New Jersey where people play soccer are football fields used for soccer. NJSIA recognizes that, and they allow you to play soccer on fields. So that the new field will be a regulation-sized field. It won't be as wide as Centennial is, but it'll still qualify for varsity and JV soccer. It will be sized for varsity and JV football as well, field dimensions. However, the seating up at the Hilltop field is about 400 people, Destin. So you wouldn't be able to run a varsity game up there, but you could run a varsity game on Centennial if and we have done that in the past when we've been in a pinch. That said, there are only bleachers on the home side, not on the far side, and the challenge that Mr. Martin described that they're trying to work out an agreement with the county is to secure some space from the lot on the far side of Centennial to possibly put bleachers and press box there so that you have more than adequate stands. The baseball field is a smaller size baseball field. However, it will qualify for use for the varsity and or JV. We had JV, but varsity JV girls softball can play up there as well. And in that outfield of that, I'll call it the softball field, but in that outfield of the softball field will also be striped for small-sided soccer as well. Okay? So that design, as I just described, is from all the conversations I've had. That's the design that will be open in the spring of 2015. Therefore, the sports that are remaining at the high school that present a challenge for Hilltop's facility are really only three things. One, it's the varsity football, given the number of people that come to those games, it'd be difficult to do it on the new part of the complex. You probably could jam it into the current Centennial, but ideally you'd have separate bleachers for the separate sides and give you more capacity. On our side, we need a solution for football for the fall of 2014, because this new thing is not going to be ready anyway. Which to me lends credibility to just securing the bleachers and the press box for the lower field, because if we don't do that, we are simply going to be renting them yet again for the third year in a row. And at this point, we should just make it a field that's viable and usable. It's what we used in the past for football, and just use it going forward. The second sport at the high school that would not benefit from Hilltop would be boys baseball, because the diamond is too small, but we have baseball diamond down here. It's also the tournaments, etc., and that way we expect to continue just as we do today. And the third thing is band. And the reason why band, although band has used Centennial in the past, it's a very, very difficult thing. It's probably the more difficult of all the sports because of the need to move the instruments. Whenever we move those instruments, we need to be renting a truck to get the instruments relocated from high school to wherever they go, even if it's only Centennial. But if we can get the stands down there, you can run the band competitions and all the rest as well. So my personal view is that we go with securing the upper field. When I say secure it, I mean just get me the 60% that we can continue to use. Get the bleachers and press box for down there, so it's a full usable field on the lower field. And then have the township finish doing their project up at Hilltop, let that run its course, try it, see what we can do best for the town. And then my personal belief remains firm for as long as I've been had the seat on the board, that the right thing for us to do, and I tell you, and I apologize if some of this comes across as impatient. I cannot wait for the day that we can agree to lease these fields over to the town. The township is in the cement and roads business and building business. The Board of Ed should be in the academics business. And the amount of time that we spend on the board talking about grass is just astounding. But just get us out of that conversation, put it in the place where it belongs. All scheduling for all community groups are done by the town. Most of the maintenance on the field is done by the town. Just put it all in where the expertise exists, and I'm sure we can carry on happily ever after. That's my view. So I'm concerned about if we put, having failed the bond for the field element twice at less than $2 million, I do think that if we put any version of number 1 and number 2 on a bond for between 4.5 and 5, 5.2, you pretty much doom the whole thing, and the risk of what would happen to the rest of the things that we need to do in a world of interest rates that are not moving the way you want them to me just poses, it's going to become too expensive, or much more expensive, for no good reason going forward. It could be, 6 months out, it could be another couple hundred, it could be another $500,000. That's very expensive lesson.
So, John, I would quite candidly take that further, because I question this $1.9 million. Because we're making an assumption that it's a foregone conclusion that anybody who wants to support the school portion of it, the non-field portion, is almost perfunctorily then going to vote for about $1.6 million and to get nothing, right? You just put it, basically fixing some perceived problem that we have. And so based on discussions that I've had with engineers, including engineers at French and Perillo, there's some latent debate that take place about that $1.9 million. So I would say that even the $1.9 million, given the uncertainty of that, it throws a a much smaller slab for sure, but still a slab over the school portion. So I don't think we crossed every T and dotted every I on the element that we'll call the field element, whether it's remediation or whether we get active investment or return out of it. So I'm inclined to take the recommendation from Steve, the administration, but to take it further, to just delay the whole thing for now and just focus on the three elements that Jim talked about. Because I'm not confident that number is the right number. Now, if we leave it in there, I guess we always have the opportunity to get more information and then knock that dead. But if someone comes in and says, "No, you only have to do $300,000 worth of work, not 1.6 million," then I guess we could still do that, right? Or I don't know.
When you spoke to, I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying, I thought we had talked about that, if the number adjusted, there was a certain, each investigated, there was a certain time frame where we could adjust the number prior to any vote. Doesn't that say we adjusted the field number, or we adjusted some number, we could make that modification, was it how many days? A couple weeks before, 10 days before?
I think 15 days.
So when during this time, we could, block that out.
When you spoke to engineers, the French Borough about the 1.9, you say there's a fault.
It's really, to your earlier point, it's really 1.6, right? Because the 300,000 is.
Right, so-
I agree with. I think we should do the tennis court. And we're talking about we get a new tennis court and we fix the four we have. Right. So I think that's a good investment.
So in the 1.6 then, in the 1.6 million, right, that's the secure the field number, right? And we agree that we have to take some degree of action. You're saying there's a question on how much you have to do to
Right.
satisfy that.
Right.
Is the 1 point, when you talk to them, which way does that number move? Is it 1.6 at the max and it's likely less in your mind, or is it 1.6 that could be 2.5?
No, the former.
Okay, so we're looking at worst case 1.6,
Correct.
and it could be less.
Yes. So that's why I say, okay, maybe we can leave it in there. But since there still remains, I think, a lot of uncertainty, because that's really what you're talking about, and when you talk about that remediation component, what we're really trying to do is just get away with the least amount, because we're not going to get anything for that. Even the 1.6, we don't get anything. So if someone, and
Steve, that's when I correct it, don't we get 60% of that field to be usable?
we'll get that anyway. So
If we don't
if,
remediate it, though, isn't that the case? If we don't remediate it, we just have a field defense of that.
no, my understanding is that if what these guys call the licensed site remediation professional, it's very subjective. So if he comes in and says, no, all you got to do is throw some dirt on there and put a fence around it, right, and you still get your 60%, right? It might cost $300,000. There's a debate about the retaining wall, whether or not there's a retaining wall needed for that. But now this guy's saying you got to do a lot of work. You got $1.6 million of it. So it's very subjective. We only have one opinion, right, of one of these black belt remediation guys in the community. So I would imagine that if someone comes in and says, no, just forget the wall, you don't need the wall. Sprinkle some dirt on there, put a fence around it. And for $200,000, we would do that. If we had someone who said that today, wouldn't we do that? I would suggest we would do that, right? We don't get anything for that extra $1.2 million, right? So that's why I say, okay, if I were nudged in that direction of doing something, then and it's a worst case, then okay, 1.6. But my concern is that I don't know the size of the cloud that this whole field project puts on the other three components. So until that's nailed down, at least for me, I just say we punt and just delay that whole thing until we get a solid view forward and a line of sight into what we're going to have, how much it's going to cost. And maybe you guys are confident that we already do. So, and I recognize that. I'm just not confident based on talking to because there was a debate, and even inside of French and Trillo, as to what we really had to do. And So, and there are people with greater expertise than I who would probably add some flavor to that. So until we have that, I hate to spend $1.6 million when we don't have to. Unless someone said, Steve, you have to do, that's how much you have to do, then I'm okay with it. So I just say we just carve it out for now, and because I mean, we're also kind of putting the voter in a very interesting situation where they're being forced to remediate an environmental hazard or problem, whatever that is, tied to an educational component. So it's really kind of a dicey, I think it's a dicey vote. And we're really putting them in a position of compelling them to do something that maybe they don't really have any expertise on. I'm not going to be confident that we have the expertise right now either. That's the community, of course. So I don't know if that's an option. Is to just punt on the whole thing and wait until we have really good, solid environmental data, and just focus on the things that we all agree on.
When you say punt on the whole thing, you mean punt on the whole bond or just the
No, just the field component, and just put the 9 million, so I guess right now we're at 16 and a half, so take off 5 and a half, 11, add the 300,000 for the tennis courts, minus the 3 and a half, right? So the tax levy would be about $8.5, $9 million.
But you do agree that if you had a firm number, whether it's 1.6 or whether it was 500K, we would go forward if you knew what the number was. Because my understanding is the state is saying you have to correct it.
But then did you give us a date where it has to be done by a certain time frame? Because
It's a couple of years, 2 years.
2 years from the time it's classified as a.
So what if we put that on the bond and the voters say no? If they keep voting no for something that we have to do, what happens?
After the third time that it votes no, we can petition the state and they'll let you do it.
It's only 2 times.
So 2 times now?
Even though,
That's how
what
West
you
Orange
say,
will
if
get
you
feel.
punt on the whole thing, if that's what you're gonna do, my suggestion would be to punt on the whole thing. One of the things that we stressed when we had the night at HBW is, and Steve mentioned over and over again, what do you expect living in Verona? What's your expectations as to what you get for your tax dollar here in Verona? And one of the things we said is that when we try to think that we're, maybe not the right word to use, but certainly among the elite in terms of what we might have to offer. And I don't see the upper fields, these upper fields that everybody says is what we should be looking to as something that is even desirable. We're talking about limited fields in terms of space, in terms of parking, in terms of spectator views, and we're not going to do anything with our own facilities or land that we have designated for those facilities. We spend a lot of time and effort talking about our co-curricular, extracurricular, and athletic activities. In terms of our athletic activities, we must have at least 50% of the high school that participates in athletics. And that may be an underestimate. Do you have a figure on that?
There's more than that.
All right. And yet we're going to delegate them to using fields that are not the most desirable. I had an opportunity this past summer to go to a field down in Nutley. They had a new gigantic field just off of Route 3 that the municipal town uses. It's gigantic. They also have a football field in front of their high school with artificial turf. That to me is first class. What we're offering here isn't to me first class. If we're going to punt it, I'd like to see punt on the whole thing. Why would we not be committed to supporting our athletic programs? Granted that the educational portion is without question agreed to by all of us as absolutely necessary. But why not? Why are we so hesitant to say we're not committed to our athletics, we're not committed to our band, we're not committed to our co-curricular or athletic programs, to the point where we'd ask the town to give them a first-class facility. And that's what we would get, whether you do the upper field or the lower field. Even the upper field, frankly, to me, would provide a first-class facility. but now we're gonna carve it out, we're gonna wait for our town to come back to us. We've been, John, we've been on this board 11 years, and they've done a lot for us, but some of the things that they said they were gonna do, we still haven't seen. Now, whether we could get a commitment from them between now and next September, if you're gonna put the whole thing, if you're gonna say punt on it, then punt on the whole thing until next September. And then when we know what we want to do with our athletic fields, and go out to the town and ask them, here's what we want, not only for our educational facilities, but for our sports facilities as well. There's so many of our students, whether they be in the high school, whether they be in the middle school, be in elementary school, all participate in sports in one way or another. I'm going to get us up to 75%. And here it is, we're going to say, no, let's not do it, let's wait. Now, we had confidence that the town was going to come to us and lease this for $1, do all these other great things for us, fine. But if we don't know that, and maybe we'll never know that. But now I'm saying, well, why don't we just wait till September and see, and then do what we need to do in September.
What about just having two questions? So I would definitely support the idea that we have question one is, do you support the school infrastructure, right? And question two is, can we have $1.6 million to fix the environmental hazard? Right? And then just
We're still ignoring an element of our program.
or even the whole field. I would be okay with that. Joe, I'm in favor of the field. If we had $5.5 million, I would turf that lower field in a heartbeat. That's where the money should go. That's what we should do, right? In my opinion, we should turf that lower field. But politically, personally, I think that you attach that field to the referendum, it sinks the whole thing. That's my opinion. I thought full-day kindergarten would go down in flames, and that was a lot closer than I thought. So obviously, I don't have my finger on the pulse of the education community. But I was on the board when the field went down twice. So if we're going to fix that, I just don't like tying them together without a real concrete vision. And I don't think we have a shared vision either from the community or even here collectively. So and I don't think we should wait on the other stuff. So I have two questions. One is the school stuff. Question two is whatever. If it's 1.6 million for the to fix the environmental hazard, I'm okay with that. If it's 4.5 million to do the upper field, I'm okay with that. I think that would be a mistake. And if it's 5.5 million to do lower field, absolutely. And I would be all in favor of that. But I think we should have two questions. I just want to get this school stuff done.
Why keep
it together? Why put it together? What's the value?
Well, because I think that as a board, we should be committed to all of our programs. Giving as much as we can to all of our students, whether they be sitting in a classroom or whether they be on an athletic field. If we put them out there, we spend a fair amount of money, quite a bit of money, as a matter of fact, on our athletic program. On our band. And we're saying, well, we'll let the town decide on that. And I'm saying, no, let's stand behind one thing and giving them a facility that they deserve in terms of what we can give them. Not something that's second class, second rate, up on a hilltop, maybe too short, maybe too long, may not be wide enough, doesn't have enough stands. Now, if the town wants to come along, they want to put. They want it, I don't know. I mean, at this point, they're going ahead with their program. And they didn't consult us in terms of what we think we needed up there. There was a point in time when they said that they would do that they come to us, they consult us.
They did. We didn't have the design, the design was done.
Well, did they come up with some size for fields?
Yes.
They did?
Yeah.
And it was never supposed to be one of our fields, so it was really,
So they modified the design about 18 months
And
ago.
yet we're saying that these are the primary venues that we want our sports team to go to. I'm just not in favor of that. I just think if we're going to be committed, should be as committed to all of our programs as much as equally. That's just the way I think.
Okay, all right, so we have, so it looks like we have still three choices. secure, one choice, not necessarily in any order, one is to secure the upper field. And I'll call it the Gym A version of things, right? The second one is don't do anything at this point, just focus on the technology, security, and the building fixes, and spend more time working to a solution for the fields. And the third one is Joe's idea of the upper field with an add-on question to do the lower field.
And just to clarify, I mean, it seems not a criticism of it. I understand the logic behind the approach, so it's not a criticism of that. But in terms of the like, you're gonna, how's it gonna be worded, right? Because you're saying, okay, assuming the first part passes, would you do this second part, right? So it's almost like a more formal or a real voting poll that what Steve took 2 weeks ago. Right? He kind of took that poll. You took, right, when you took your poll, you said the upper field or lower field.
And then option 3, right?
And then option 3. So this would be like, I think most of the people in that audience were inclined to do one or the other, right?
They were on option 3. Option 2 was do the lower field.
Right, but everybody in that room was inclined to do something around the field. Like, we didn't see that I think is about 2/3 of the people are like, don't we have enough fields? They didn't come. Right, so we didn't really give them an option other than option 3, I guess. So had they could come there, but how would it be worded? If the first part passes, then if you vote yes for this,
It alters the first question. Our lawyer said that it's not common, but she's done it, and it's not a problem. So normally, the 2 questions, you either vote for one or the other. This thing is you vote for this, and the second one will alter the first one, which is, she said is okay.
In other words, you have to pass the first question, right? And then assuming the first question passes, then the second question is a yes, no vote. If the yeses on question 2 outweigh the no's on question 2, it alters the first one. It's in the
right? And it's such a small amount of money. I mean, why don't we just, if we're going to do that, why don't we just put the lower field on the? I mean, I think collectively, as a board, don't we think that if I inferred correctly from Mike's view, that the lower, and even some Jim's comments, I don't want to put words in your guys' mouth, but I'm certainly of that if we're going to spend the money, let's do the lower field, if we're going to do that.
Correct. That's correct from my point of view.
Right, I inferred correctly, right?
Yeah, you're correct.
And so then why not just do that, if we're going to do it?
Because there's a question of, not even a question, there's a cost of replacing it and sustaining it. Whereas 10 years down the road, it's going to cost you $400,000 to do the upper field. It's going to cost you $1.2, almost $1.3 million to do the lower field. We're scratching the bottom of the well to come up with money to do things we need to do. How do you come up with $1.2 million?
My only kind of rebuttal to that theory is, we did put in an entire administrative structure to support curriculum development and Common Core standards, right? And there is a sustainability factor to that as well. As a community, we choose to run 4 elementary schools. There is a sustainability factor to that as well. And to your point, which I find interesting though, is you support having a state-of-the-art, high-class facility, but I think if you value that, we value our administrative structure, we value our 4 principals in our elementary schools, we value our 4 elementary schools, that you would then value having a facility in which you are going to pay that sustainability factor. So it just seems, I'm not like degrading or anything, but
there's a difference.
understand.
The difference is the sustainability that you're talking about in terms of our evaluation process and in our annual budget. Every year we budget to do what we need to do in terms of that. Unless you put it into your budget, unless you're going to put $40,000, actually it's not even $40,000, it's $40,000 every year for the next 10 years, so that 10 years from now you have $40,000. Now you're going to put $1.2 million in your budget. One is sustained with your general fund, the other is I don't know how you're going to.
But to John's point though, I mean, I would just say our job as academics to agree with you, but say that hopefully 10 years from now when that needs to be replaced, the town's paying for it. And handling all things feel, grass and concrete and dirt, right? And that it is an us. So I think
you want to hang your hat on that? and say, well, let's hope.
I don't think we have $40,000 each year for the next 10 years.
If we did, I would imagine
I
it's.
mean, every year of the 11 years I've been on the board, when it comes to the cat versus the cost of running the place, we're in the cutting business, not, $40,000
So,
to save.
how do we,
I don't think we have,
how do you,
My point is-
in good conscience, go for one that's gonna cost 1.2 million?
my point is you don't have money to do either one. By that logic, Joe, we don't have money to do either one. You don't have 400, nobody has 1.2. You don't have either one. I think we're gonna be in the, I think
the big one.
my own view is the only possible viable outcome going forward, unless the cap changes, is that it's inevitable that municipality will have to take over responsibility for the fields. That's it.
I'll go along with that, if we can get them to say something, do we have even an inkling when we could get some sort of a commitment from the town council?
No, I think we have to operate without that,
We
right?
just sit here on our hands until.
No, I don't think so. I don't think we sit on our hands, and I don't think it's fair to say we don't care about the, I certainly care about all the programs, band, on to, baseball and freshman basketball, every one of them. That's why we're trying for the third time to fix these fields. But I've got, scars on my back still from failing this at less than half the money we're talking about now, twice. And I do think that if you put it out there for $4.5–5 million of a facility in the one question, I believe it compromises the whole question. And like everybody said before about just the cost of the interest rates, I mean, to me, I have my own personal views on what I think is going to happen in this economy, but it's not going to be, you're not going to see old time low interest rates in Christmas time.
The only thing that keeps me with agreeing with Steve about pulling the whole field portion out of it altogether is that what if the town doesn't give us a commitment and can't give us a commitment? Now we're stuck with doing nothing on that field. Where do we get the money to do that? You can put another question out there, which is an athletic only question, and we know what happens with our athletic only question. It's gone down twice. All right, so if we pull it out, and I agree that there's some validity to doing that, but if you pull it out and you can't get a commitment from the town, then we're no better off in the foreseeable future than we are right now.
We have until Tuesday night to do this. Is it possible to get a call with the injury, French and Perlow? I would recommend to get held in there.
I don't think it's practical, John, in the next 2 days.
You know, they can be able to get to this 1.6 number and say, which version of the number are we comfortable about?
But Steve, to your point though, and to see if I understand you correctly on the 1.6, if we were to agree to include the 1.6 and be able to then verify before the 14 days, whatever it is, that we have to change, you would be comfortable with that so long as we do reduce or amend that 1.6 accordingly once we find out more information. Is that correct or no?
Yeah, I mean, if I were convinced, and not that I have to be convinced, just that that there's all options have been exhausted, all questions have been answered as to what we really have to do, then I guess it's not, I don't really care where it goes then, right? Again, I personally would like to see this play out where we just leave it out there, let it go down 3 times, and then let someone else figure out how to fix the problem. I'm really not comfortable that we're compelling people to vote on something they really don't understand about this environmental problem. If it is a problem, what is? I've seen the environmental report that's in there. It's not like this. We covered up Love Canal, and let people vote on the school stuff. Just get it done, and then let them vote 3 times that either they want to fix an environmental problem or not, and then let someone else deal with that problem. We're not going to get anything for that money. All we're going to do is get a fence. No matter what we do, we're just going to get a fence. If we don't do something akin to $5 million, like why are we doing anything? So I don't know why we're tying it especially that component of getting nothing. I can see that trying to tie the compelling people to vote on a field So they're gonna hold their nose and vote on the field because they really want the security and the technology and the buildings fixed. Right, I can see that that's kind of political ploy, right? I don't know how, it's a little disingenuous, but that's the nature of the beast, right? So, and I don't know how many people are out there that are inclined to do that, right? And if too many people see through that, they know this is, or that's their perception, and we're not really committed, like, I don't think we're really committed to what we want to do with this field. Then we just vote the whole thing down. We'll be back in September anyway, paying out. Yeah, I don't know, but who knows what the interest rates are going to be. But we're going to be back. And I think that's the bad day at Black Rock, is that we're back again here talking about security, technology, bricks, mortar, boilers, UNIVACs. All right, so let's just get that done. I think the tenor in the town is that they would vote yes for that $9 million portion.
Just want to add a few things to that. Thanks for the information there. My thought is, what do you expect from Verona? I don't expect to have basically a condemned field next to my high school. To me, we have to do something. Lower field, upper field, I think we still have to have remediation as part of that. Whether it's 1.6, whether we do an evaluation and get a lower number. For me, property value-wise, I don't want to sit there and say, let's leave the field as is, but we do a fence around it. That's ridiculous. I think we have to do something. If we can do a compromise of, let's do the remediation, get that done. If we need to do a part 2 for a field, that's great. But to me, whether it's 1.6 million or 500,000 to remediate, to get 60% of that field usable, to get parking lot and tennis courts usable, I think we solve a lot of our problems in that, to do that. Plus, we have the ability to get the security technology and the building improvements done at the same time. And whether we do the bleachers, the press box, again, that's an option that I threw out there. I want to be cost effective, but I also want to make sure that we have fields available for people to play. And I don't want to forget that the lower field is still usable. It is a grass field, it is usable, we play football on it. My kids play soccer in this town, and I don't think once they've ever used a lower field ever. Because we use those other fields that we don't even use that field. So right now, my impression is the lower field's only used for high school, which is great, and for the band and for all the sports. But I don't see all the other sports for the lower ages using those, particularly using the big lower field. And I don't think they ever used the upper field either when that was using them. So again, back to my point, I think the security technology and the building improvements is key. And I think we need to remediate the field. And I'd love to do lower field. If we have all the money, that'd be great to do all those fields. But we're talking about $10 million between the hilltop and the lower field. That's a lot of money for a town like Verona with 13,000 citizens, and to pay for it. And I think to be smart is let's do something to the field, remediate what we can remediate, fix what we can fix. The lower field's still usable as football, and I don't want to keep repeating myself, but to me, say the heating system goes down to high school, and on a day like today, what do? You have to close the schools down because we couldn't afford to get this referendum through because we're talking about fields back and forth. To me, there's some critical items that the this referendum has to be done, but we also have to look at the big picture and say, let's support our athletics the best way we can financially right now. And for me, it's the remediation, roll the dollars as much as we can. And I think we have enough time to lock down a number before the referendum. And then, if we agree, with Joe said about having a second question about having the field on there as an option, then I'm willing to talk about that.
Technically, could you have, and I'm not saying do this, I'm trying to understand the different points of view, the difference between two caps. So like, if you were to do the 1.6, right, as part of the referendum, you could technically have a total separate question for this lower field, not inclusive of remediation. Because remediation will be part of the full proposal.
Well, all the fully fixing the upper field and fully dealing with the lower field both include securing the other
What I'm
field.
saying to Steve's point though, is if we were 100% confident that 1.6 was a number, right? And so that was part of the overall package, academics plus that remediation. Essentially, that second question would be completely independent of anything else. It would just be, we believe as a board that the lower field is the best thing to church, the best thing for all schools in town, so we're going to go ahead and do that. Does that make sense? Okay.
I'm not following it.
Because, so what I'm saying, so there's two options, right, that I feel like are emerging. The 1.6 and verify as part of the, as one referendum item. And the second is an alternate item, second question of 5.2. And we're inferring that that 5.2 is inclusive of remediation. So we're saying we're bundling the 5.2 with remediation. I'm saying, what if we bundle the remediation in the original proposal, and the field is something completely separate instead?
Yeah, I think that's basically, well, so that would be, so Steve's recommendation is to do that, right, not without the second part. Right?
Yeah.
Because, right, your recommendation is to do option 3, right, which is to do all the school stuff and then remediate the field.
I think right now, given the tenor of what's going on with the town and the field up the Hilltop project that's going through, and trying to get this passed, because that was part of the question on the survey. It wasn't just what's the best option, but what's the best option that can pass. I think that the option of doing the option 3, where you do some of this stuff, because, again, saying what you expect in Verona, I mean, I think we can't leave a DEP contaminated site, regardless of whether or not it's that contaminated. It's got a DEP sign on it. I didn't expect that here. I don't think anybody else did. So I think you got to do that. Mike's opinion, I think his idea was to bundle the 1.9, so I'll call it, into the original question, and then on the second question, pulling the 1.9 from the 5.1. If you guys are following
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
The second question would be 3 point whatever.
So to change the tenor of it, to your point, I think you have a really great point, Steve, which is, you know, don't make people hold their noses to vote, right? And don't be disingenuous about it. And so there's an element of if tenor changes, right? If we look at it as you pull the 1.9 from the 5.2, it lowers the number and allows us to have just a really genuine discussion and an opportunity to address the community. But what it doesn't do, I don't think, is really address the question of French and Perillo's estimate and whether we feel confident that is, you know, verified.
I don't think it addresses it, but it does, I think it's capped at the worst case,
Yeah.
right? So, and I'm okay with that. And I'm not suggesting that we leave a DEP label as a contaminated site. I'm not suggesting that we do that. I'm just not, I don't think it should be tied to the rest of the stuff, right? So if the community doesn't want a DEP site in their town, then they should have no problems checking off both boxes, right? And if they're confident that it's 1.6 or 0.6 or 0.2, right, it should be immaterial. That's what it is. I'm just not confident that we exhausted all the, again, based on my conversations with some, so I'll say engineers who are much more knowledgeable than I am, right? And we have got one guy, he says it's got to be 1.6, right? That's what the one guy said. And so with that uncertainty, let's just pull it out. And if everybody counts and they vote for both, then by all means, we'll fix it. If we can fix it for $500,000 instead, that's okay. That's that much better. But I would be loath to be sitting here in September saying, you know, we should have just passed the school stuff and then not worried about the field, right? Because here we've got to do it all over again. Right? And I don't know. Again, I don't know the risk. I think it's a much bigger risk if we put the whole field in there than including the environmental piece. But why take the chance? Why take the chance? Because we get no benefit from just the 1.6 other than fixing a problem. Right? There's no real academic or usage benefit. So that's just that we should do we got to figure out how to get away with doing the least amount of possible. There's nothing we get for that. The return is zero.
Can we do that between now and 14 days before the referendum then?
Why don't we do this? We have Mr. Forte is gonna have to leave for an appointment in a little bit. So why don't we, look, I think at this point, we've got opinions on the table, I think we understand each other's points of view, and we got until Tuesday night to try to get our thoughts together. So maybe what we do is we've got a pretty well-attended meeting here. We should advertise, we're gonna talk about AstroTurf more often, we get much more people coming to one meetings. So why don't we open up, if you've got any public comment, we'll hear those too, and get some other opinions as well, once anybody disagrees.
Good.
Okay, you wanna come up?
Yeah, Steph.
Hi, Bill Tall, 64 Fairway Avenue. I know a bunch of you. I'm just sitting back here just to throw some more ideas at you. And if I heard things correctly, if the voters vote down this referendum on the DEP project twice, you get to roll with it anyway?
The way it works is if you propose a referendum on the school side for essentially the same thing twice, and it gets voted down, then we can petition the state to override that, and they'll look at the project on its merits, and if they deem it to be a necessity, they'll allow you to just go through regardless of what the public said.
Okay.
Now, it gets sort of interesting on what they qualify as a need. I can tell you that West Orange's complex up there at the high school was done that way. It failed twice, and then the state came in and said, no, you need to have that, and they go through it anyway.
You mean the athletic?
Yeah.
So with that said, why don't you guys break this into 3 questions and have one just be on your 1.6? Because if we vote it down, you get to September, your clock runs. Okay, so now you voted the second time, it gets voted down, you can do what you want with the state, you get this thing moving. And you get the 1.6 out of all your ideas. No field, no school security, no school infrastructure, it's on its own merit. So put a third item in, just that, nothing else.
I'm sorry, what's the third item?
That question, $1.6
First
million.
item, I think start first item on the school, let's call it the school.
All right, you had 2 questions that are going to jump, right? 2 items are going to go with an A and a B possibility. All I'm saying is, instead of even having 1.6 involve anything, make it its own item that people vote on. If it gets voted down, it starts your clock for the 2 vote downs.
Right, so that would be 2 questions. One question is on the $7.5 million
Okay.
for the buildings, and the question 2 would be the 1.6 or 1.9 to do. Yeah, well, I would say that, I think that's what Jim is essentially saying, would be 2.3, because you want to have.
You're incorporating it into all of your questions, so that it's part of,
You could make it 2 separate questions.
that's what I'm saying.
Right.
2 separate questions.
Consensus is, if we fail that second question twice at much lower numbers, it'll probably fail again. And if it does fail, you put it up there again. If it fails the second time, petition the state to overrule and say you must do it, and problem solved.
Why not? It takes out of the worry that you're talking about where people put the state test in and want to pass it and everything else. It has its own item. And you guys are kind of scot-free as far as it goes, because we voted down as voters. You get to go to the state, and then the state is waiting for you to have it go forward. So that's the first thing, right? Then I draw the question, even the 1.6, and I'm amazed you've got one opinion on this number in all this time. I mean, it draws into question the infrastructure piece and security piece, and how you guys came to that number. And how many?
We have 2, this is the lower of the second.
Okay, 2, I mean, not 5, not 6.
No, let's back up, because I think somebody asked about this during the week. These are not bids. These are not bids. These are engineering estimates for purposes of referendum planning. Once if the referendum is passed, then you have to go through the bid process to solicit any number of bids and get the lowest bidder. These aren't bids. These are engineering specs.
So you don't even know if they're solid numbers. They could come in higher than this.
It's sort of like saying you're gonna put an addition on your home, and you get an architect to come in and estimate what it will cost you, and then you go find the contractor, right?
Okay.
Right, how many architects would you hire to do that job? We're at the architecture,
Okay.
so that's what this
The
is.
thing we have one of is an opinion on what we have to do. So a professional came in and said, in order to, so he puts his name on the opinion and the recommendation, and then submits that to the Department of Environmental Protection, who has given him the authority. They basically then will sign off on his recommendation. So they kind of have outsourced this expertise to engineering firms. So he said, in my opinion, in order for what I would recommend that the DEP approve, it's this. And then his engineering colleague says, oh, if Verona has to do that, it's going to cost them $1.6 million, right? What we don't have is an opinion from another seasoned professional who says, no, I think the DEP would be, they would also accept this, right? And then the engineer would, the estimator would then look at that and say, oh, that's all you have to do, then it would cost $300,000.
So here's maybe a little bit of color on this. So the estimates that we have in the 1.6 million number are following the DEP guidelines to remediate the property. So remediate the property means you can run around on it again, right? What we're talking about doing is, what would it cost us to secure the bad part of it, make it a wildflower garden for this purposes, and just use the other 60% of the field that really doesn't have any issues. The prescription that we have in front of us looks like it's the same prescription as if you were going to remediate it fully, which is why we think it might be too high. There might be a way to secure it. Correct. Without the compaction and all that. So we're thinking, it sounds to us reasonably that from a little bit of Q&A, the engineers are saying, well, you know, it depends on what the DP allows you to do. What we're telling you is following the letter of what they're saying to fully remediate it. You're trying to come up with a solution that's going to go back to the DP and say, we don't want to fully remediate it, we just want to secure it and recover the good spots. Right?
I'm just saying, yeah, put it on its own merit.
No, I'm saying the question about why, yeah, I agree. The question on why we think the number is higher than it ought to be is that difference.
Okay.
What we have in front of us is a spec that says remediate it under the guidelines that say you can fully use it.
Yeah.
And we're saying, no, the plan was just secure it and close off parts of it. That's an option, whether it's a desirable option or not, is yet to be seen. That's the question about the number. I think that that's
Just to add to that, I mean, I like your point, because I was thinking the same thing. You know, in a perfect world, I would say, you know, you have the school components, so 3, technology, security, and building. And then you have the remediation part, you can separate that out, and you can separate the field center. And you can have, you know, 3 different questions, really, saying, you want to pass the school items, you want to pass the remediation, you want to pass the full field. I mean, so, but to me, and pouring out the remediation piece might be an option.
I agree and I disagree, right? So you guys have to decide if you want to go for the infrastructure and the field, because they kind of go together within the school, right? The DEP to me is a separate item, and you have the ability, you can call it game theory if you want, you have the ability to make that its own thing. It doesn't have to be part of what you do for the school. You're being forced into, by the government, remediate. So put it to the voters of Verona, let them vote it down twice, put it out at $20 million. Let them vote it down twice, go get the best option, petition the state, and get it done. You guys shouldn't be wasting time talking about it. It should be a very easy decision, a very easy concept. Put it on the ballot now, put it on the ballot in September, and then really go to work. Let the state help you out, because they're going to be the final say anyway, and you're done with it. You guys need to do the infrastructure, the security, and the field. Figure out if we're tying together, if you're willing to take that shot at $13 million, if the town votes it down, or at $9.5 million. My personal opinion is you go 9.5 because you have a $3.5 million grant that you get to use, and it makes sense. You go back to the town, you figure out with the town, because you have time, how you sell them the fields, lease it back from them. It gives you money that you can then use instead of having to put $1 million out in 10 years and $40,000 a year and all that other stuff. Goes back to the brick and mortar theory. I think that's great. But that's what I stand on. Right? That's you. I appreciate that. Right?
Quick question, Carol. If we put 2.3 out, can we then petition for 5.2? Or do you have, what goes down has to be petitioned? Like if we say 2.3 went down, 2.3 went down, that would redo our own thing, but
It's not the money amount, it's what you were trying to do that was wrong.
that's what I'm saying, like, but if what we're trying to do isn't a full lower field, can we then petition for a full lower field? So we have to put 5.2 out there, get put it down, 5.2 out there, get it down. Then, okay, that was the whole part I was trying to figure out.
Anybody else?
Now, the old 15 Howard Street. I'd like to talk about the positives, the things that we know we need. And we came out with this sheet last week's meeting. We know, and it's almost like it's almost set in cement. We know the general building needs. We know the cost. We've got to get that done. It's been postponed and kicked down, as you people have used the term, kicked the can down the road long enough. We've got to get that done. We know we need the technology upgrade. We know we have to do the high school heating system. You've got to get that through. There's no, you've got to put that out there. You've got to sell it. I can't think of anybody who could come up with a reason to vote against that. I have some questions on security. Unfortunately, I haven't gotten to talk to Mr. Forte yet, so I'm going to skip over that. But those first three items on that sheet that was out last week, those definitely have to be there. And when you come to the fields,
First, we have the security technology development.
No, skipping security.
I said I don't want to comment on it.
So what are when you say the first three?
You have heating, HVAC.
Fine, okay, so it's-
Okay, security, I believe we need that, but I have some questions that I want to talk to Mr. Forte privately on and, get answers, and then I could better speak on it. I just didn't have a chance this past week. When it comes to those fields, okay, when I hear the discussion that's going on here, and anybody who will watch this on TV will know that you just really haven't had a chance to think of all the options that you have. And this is why I suggested in the past that you separate out those items and put them in, do this for March, get it passed, and then say we're going to work and we're going to get all the facts and figures on the fields and do that in the fall. And depending on, like I said, once I get answers on security, then I'll be willing to comment on that. But I suggested that in the past, and I would almost just, I sit here and I say, I want to support what we really need here. But yet, if you put all of this together, I couldn't support it. I'm sorry. Not the way, not at this point. And I know you got a time frame that you have to deal with. So, my feeling is take out what still needs a lot of thought and discussion. Do that discussion, come back in September with it, and then we'll do a real sell job on that when we know exactly what we need and what we can do.
Somebody,
We had somebody right here.
Hi, Felicia Biasati, Goliath, 7 Mountain Road. How are you? I have a question about the HVAC piece. Have you done an energy audit for the
Yes.
schools?
Yes.
Because it didn't show on the website that
We're-
Verona has done an energy audit.
We did Paul, correct me if I'm, we did an audit of just the high school, then we did a district-wide audit, and now we're involved in a next level type of audit too.
We did a local government energy audit through the DPU. That took place about a year ago, and about 8 months ago. And then we also had the engineering firm do an analysis of Verona High School.
Well, you know what, could you step up to the mic just to say it that way? I think it'll be better to get on the.
So we had a local government energy audit conducted by a company called Dome Tech, who performs amenities right through the DPU. And then we also had the engineering firm, EI Associates, do analysis of Verona High School for the mechanical system.
and then there's a third piece that we approved to kick off.
Yeah, there's, as part of the next evolution with the Energy Savings Improvement Program through the DPU, we're going to have an investment grade audit conducted this spring by one of the ESCO firms that's going to be bidding on our ESA.
Okay, so the ESCO, that was my question, that was what I was getting at. So then there's going to be a company, an ESCO company that will be hired to do improvements.
Yeah, we just approved
So-
going to bid for that last meeting.
So how is that different from the $3.8 million that you have here for HVAC upgrades?
Well, that's different in that none of that work's been done yet. The investment grade audit hasn't been done yet. We haven't selected an ESCO yet. So it would be premature to deduct anything from that dollar amount for the mechanical system at the high school without knowing what the ESIC will actually include.
So there's a possibility that the $3.8 million will be less.
Correct.
Yeah, correct.
Just to clarify though, sir, it's not less, right? We're gonna spend the money, it's just a matter of, the mechanism that you finance it. Either way, if we have to buy a new boiler, the taxpayers of Verona have to fund it. Whether they fund it.
Not necessarily, because, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the purpose of the ESCO is that you pay out of the savings over a certain amount of time.
Yeah, but the fund, you're paying, that's true. You're paying, what you're paying out of these savings is you're paying off the loan to make the investment.
Right.
So the initial loan has to be done the same way anyway. So you're spending,
So then the savings, what's the savings paying for?
we always get some savings. Savings, they always accrue back to our general fund.
So it'll go back to your regular budget?
Always, yeah. You know, if
So
we put,
there's no tax relief to the taxpayers of that savings? It goes back to your regular budget, it doesn't get relief from the...
No, it's like, so if we spend $1 million on new light bulbs that save us $50,000 a year,
Mhm.
right? If we take the $1 million from the referendum and buy our own light bulbs, right, and we get $50,000 in savings that would then go into the general fund, we can send it back to taxpayers if we have that option. We always have that option of not taxing too much, right? So it's always a burden on the taxpayer. The other mechanism is that you could lease through the ESIC program. You could sign up for on a capital lease, but we would still get the same $50,000. So once we get the savings because the energy savings from the better light bulbs, then we, depending on which way we go, we either have to send an interest and principal check to the bank, or we have to send a payment on the lease to the ESCO. So, but either way, we get all the savings, but so it's just a matter of whether or not you want to invest capital to get a return on that.
Right, okay. Because the districts that I'm working with, they do exactly that, and they have guaranteed savings, and they pay it out of the savings. They're not going out for referendum for
Yeah, the ESCO guarantees energy savings, they don't guarantee dollar savings.
No, they do, they guarantee dollar savings. The ESCOs that I'm working with right now, so we can talk about that.
Yeah,
Okay.
talk to Paul, because we'd like to get them on the list. We just sent out a request for proposal, because that's a much different, we met with Honeywell and we met with Train,
Right.
and they do not guarantee dollar savings.
They imply the dollar savings by guaranteeing you less usage of utility. But if they don't guarantee you a price of utility, so if the price of utility continues to move or your usage changes, they don't guarantee that.
No, they don't get, you're right, they don't guarantee that the price of, the PSNG is not going to raise their price. Okay, so that was my first question. My second question is with regards to the remedial action work plan, is that in place? Is
The remedial action would be.
for the environmental issues that we have?
No, that hasn't been submitted to the state yet. That's going to be the next part of the process.
So we're
Determining water.
Phase one?
Yeah, notification has been given to the EP of contamination. So, I mean, the next step, and we kind of stopped the process because, we were at this point of trying to decide what the best course of action would be. The remedial action work plan would be the next step in that process.
Depending on which version of upper field we're talking about.
What kind of contaminant was that around phase one? What was that show? Was it historical?
It's historic fill. I mean, this is not my area of expertise, but it was basically low-level contamination, but it exceeds the residential threshold. So, I mean, take that as you will. But it's essentially petroleum-based products, asphalt, essentially was found below the ground, so it exceeds the threshold.
You don't have that in our house, okay. So my last comment is actually with regards to the presentation. The presentation was great. You guys gave us a great plan for the field, but there was no plan for the music program addition. I was a little disappointed about that. So do you have any schematics of what the addition for the music program at the high school?
That's in the, must give myself a heart attack there. That's in the buildings part of the plan, so the.
Okay, I didn't, it was not on the presentation online.
If you look on the Buildings and Grounds website, there's a bunch of presentations regarding this referendum. It's mentioned in there. The schematics aren't in there, but the project.
I saw a line item, that's all I saw.
I mean,
So
I'd be
how
happy
much,
to show
what's the
it.
square footage that you're adding to the music program?
Well, it's about doubling it, something.
It's a little under 1,600 square feet.
We're adding 1,600?
Okay.
And we're also refurbishing the rest, correct? Correct.
Okay. And then as far as the questions, I agree with Steve. I think that it should be a separate question, not that my opinion means anything to you, but I really, really think that you cannot bundle. With all due respect, Mr. Bolino, I think that you've been on the board for too long, and you cannot bundle security for the children with, a field that may not have. Security should be a priority. Thank you.
Excuse me. Sure, that's not good. This is the parking lot.
We can't put this online because your security won't be. We talk about it, we list it, but we can't show you. I mean, I would show you it personally if you want to look. Okay?
Anyone else?
Hello, everybody. Rudy Frizzy, 2 Georgia Road. Just a quick comment. Include the clock on your referendum. Because every year, every time I come here, the clock either isn't working. So just for a few more.
It works twice a day, Rudy.
Fix that too.
Include
It's
the
got
clock.
those hands now.
Just a couple quick comments. I think security is very important. I do really appreciate what everybody's doing to make sure that the buildings are good. It's really been too long that the buildings are the way they are, in spite of the work that was done, it seems just a few years ago, with the new construction. But I do really think that this board should really think about keeping everything together. I'm an advocate of keeping it together because the environmental issue that has now come up with the fields, if this board is divided and has to ask multiple questions, I feel pretty strongly that the voters are not going to be able to get through a whole list of questions. I think that, in my opinion, I think the working with the field and repairing the field is just as important as the security of the students, with all due respect. I think the fact that our students are right next to an area that is quote-unquote contaminated is really a disgrace. I think the fact that those fields, you drive up and down Sampson and see these roped off areas is just not why I moved to Verona and not why I have our kids here at this school. So I am a strong supporter of a bundle question. So thank you all for all your efforts. I really appreciate it, and good luck with making the right decision.
Yep.
Good afternoon, folks. Kevin Ryan, 92 Elmwood Road. And I'm going to speak to you as a 8-year resident of the community and also as a member of the town council, at least for another 3 years or so, God willing, if I can make it through. But I just wanted to address some of the points that Mr. Bolino brought up, and I wanted to commend Mr. Quattrochi for the comments that he's made so far regarding, what I would call informal interaction between the board and officials in the town. There have been some informal meetings that have gone on. I've spoken to members of the community, probably the same people that you have spoken to in the sports community, who are concerned about the idea of the town basically committing $10 million in the aggregate, okay? We tend, as different boards, we tend to look at things from our own perspective sometimes, and we don't always connect the dots. And maybe we didn't, and I'm not criticizing either board at this point. But I think, going forward, we have to, as two boards, try to get together a little more. We missed the boat last year. We had a meeting 2 years ago, which I thought was very productive. And somehow, I guess everybody's schedule sort of got caught up in 2013. I believe we just sort of let that slide. At the last council meeting that we had, I asked Mr. Martin and the mayor to please contact officials to schedule a joint meeting between the both bodies, because I think that's the only way that we're really going to hash out some of the issues that Mr. Quattrochi raised regarding what the town can and can't do with the Board of Education going forward to work on common problems. I think the fields are an area where there is overlap, okay, because the recreation programs and the school programs, they do use that facility. I go back to a time in the town when we didn't have, excuse me, the Hilltop Complex, where the rec programs were predominantly reliant on using school facilities. Somehow, it got worked out. I don't want to sound like Mr. Uzola. I realize times change, but somehow we managed to use the school gyms, we used all the fields. Most of the fields were Board of Education property. Mr. Mortensen ran the programs, I participated in them, I coached in them, so I can't believe that there isn't some way that we can sit down, to follow Mr. Day's point, and, try to come to some way that we can do a common approach. There's no way that we can sit down between now and the time that you have to decide, what you want to put on the referendum for the town to commit, to help you with the field. That's just not realistic. Maybe between now and September, I think we could, we could make more progress in terms of sitting down as boards to see if there's any, common ground that we can come to. So I agree with what Mr. Cartocci said. Fields are something that obviously are used by the kids. The kids use the recreation program, the kids are in the school system, these are the same kids. Sometimes the way we talk, we think we got two different pools of kids here. And, that's, excuse me, that's not the case. So we ought to be able to sit down and see what we can and can't do. At Mr. Forte's meeting, I used the analogy, there's one pair of pants with two pockets. The idea, I don't want people to come up with the idea that the town has a lot of pixie dust money that we can just spread around, on the municipal side of the budget. We don't, but maybe we can be creative. And I know Mr. Martin has helped out in the past, when you had the crisis, and I fully endorse what he did in terms of helping out, I believe, with the bleacher rental. I know we do use some of the building and grounds personnel to help out. All that's great. So, but maybe there's a way forward that we can do to try to help out. I agree with what Mr. Petrocchi said. I know there are some people who are still looking for us maybe to scale back on the Hilltop project. I think that train has left the station. I don't think there's a sentiment on the board, to pull back on that. A lot of work has gone into, passing the bond ordinance. We're still in the process, though, of looking at bids. We've not awarded a contract yet, but I just don't think the schedules are still going to overlap, to allow you the flexibility for us to sit down and tell you that we can guarantee, we're going to be able to help you out. So the September date seems realistic. To answer your point, Mr. Bonino, between now and September, hopefully we can meet as a board. It's interesting. I just got an email from the League of Municipalities, and I think there's a concurrent group statewide for different boards of education, encouraging boards of ed and municipal governments to work together to try to save the taxpayers some money. So, hopefully going forward, we can do that. Someone mentioned it's 14,000 people in the town, last census, okay? 2.5 square miles, okay? $10 million in bond issues to do recreation facilities. When people look at it, they get one tax bill. To go to the point that Mr. Spardell made before. It just doesn't compute to them. And I think they have to see more from both bodies. I'm including the town council and the Board of Education, that there was a more concerted effort to try to coordinate plans. Hopefully we can show them that going forward. And thanks for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate it. Yes?
I'm going to put you on the spot. Can I put you on the spot?
You wouldn't be the first guy. Go ahead.
Do you genuinely feel there's a consensus on the town council to be willing to help us with our field remediation problem between now and September, that you could get?
At this point, I think you've got, no, right now, no, okay? But I think because we haven't had any discussions on
Remediation
it.
or the athletic?
Be more specific, I'm sorry.
I put the two of them together. Remediation and the athletic field to me is one question. The whole package, whether it's up or lower, one of each, two of each, whatever, the whole thing. Remediation and rehabilitation of an athletic field. Do you think that there's consensus on the board to help the Board of Education with that problem in the very immediate future, like between now and September?
No. Okay, but it's because we haven't had any, look, I've been on the council a little over 2 years. We haven't had any formal discussion. Maybe Mr. Petrocchi and Mr. Martin have had them, I'm not questioning that.
We had the town council's liaison committee and the Board of Ed committee met, it was last spring on this, when we started on how this was all going to be shaped. So we did meet with Mr. Leno, myself, Mr. Forte, Mr. Divot, and outside Mr. Martin was there, Meg Sapienza was there, I think Jim Help was there, I think Doug Huber was there. So that, we had that, we didn't have a public session with the full bodies.
And I think sometimes, in all due respect, if you have a full, why I'm pushing for a combined session, sometimes these problems get fleshed out a little bit more, and maybe the public gets a better understanding of the constraints that each board is under. I realize we just can't mix and match funding. It's not all that easy on certain issues. But where there is overlap with the fields, I think there might be some ability to do that. To consensus now, no. I think there's a consensus now to start looking at the problem. And maybe that doesn't, and I think between now and September, you'll get a definite answer, yes or no. Okay, that's, I think, the best that we can do for you at this point. I can only speak for myself at this point. I would be open to, starting the discussion and seeing where we can go with that. And in the informal meetings that I've attended, I think the time is right to start that dialogue again. I don't know, John, whether you get that sense.
No, Kevin, I agree, because the thing there is one thing that's different about this whole thing than any of the years past. And that is that we got the DEP sticker on the upper front. That's what it is, right? To Billy's point earlier, we have to do something to some degree, whether it's the 500,000 issue solution or the $2 million solution. We have to get some more facts and details, but there's no one saying, no, don't worry about it, just leave it, right? That's not. So that's one thing that's different. The second thing I think that's different is in all scenarios, the topic of Board of Education management of the fields, to me, is a game with only one destined to lose outcome. It takes an inordinate amount of time and attention and focus away from math, science, reading, and social studies, which is the one thing they're supposed to be doing. So, and then the third thing is, and this has been the consistent bit, when you consider the 6 facilities that we have on the Board of Ed side, the 4 elementaries, the middle school, and high school, the 4 elementary fields are used by the Board of Education for the occasional field day exercise. There's no activities that we run on them. They're 100% used after school hours and on weekends as scheduled by record. So they're fields that we somehow maintain responsibility for, but to make sure that they're available from 3:30 on. We're sort of like the outsiders on our own property. The high school certainly is used by the schools, and to some degree, the middle school field. Some degree, not all. And I think when you look at all the facts and you add it up, to me, it's just anything that we can collectively do that takes the Board of Ed out of the dirt business is a good trade for me. Just get me out of talking about grass. It's just not where we need it. It's a double whammy for me because it's endless and fruitless conversation in a very difficult financial model to support. I mean, if we could just operate the way the council has the latitude to operate, where if it's a capital need, you go through a good vetting process and say this is a sensible thing to do, and you take responsibility for doing it, this would have been solved long ago. Our dilemma is the need to go to public referendum for capital. And and I don't think in the town of Verona there's ever been a question about whether to fix a chemistry lab or a library or anything like that. When you talk about turf and the Board of Ed raising, it's just a game over.
Right. And to answer Mr. Bellino's question, I mean, I'm not blowing my own horn. When the issue came up over the Hilltop project, I voted no at that point. Okay, I was the one no vote on the bond ordinance precisely because I felt that we should have maybe looked at other alternatives in terms of increasing the playing field area. Okay, and could have been coming to the Board of Ed using it at that point in time. That wasn't the predominant point of view on the council. The bond issue was passed, so I appreciate your skepticism. The only thing I can say going forward is I think the issue needs to be flushed out. Whether it gets to the conclusion that you're looking for, that remains to be seen. That should be part of the discussion. But I think the public in general should see both boards and what their positions are, because when the public looks at their tax bill, it comes out at one number at the end of the day. And it shouldn't be turned into a seniors versus, people with kids in the school system. I had a son who went through the school system. I was co-president of the Music Association for 2 years. So, I'm well aware of the benefits of having a great education system, even for people who don't have kids in the school. We don't want to see, you know, DEP signs up here. I want to see you get, you know, 95% of what, you know, of what you're looking to get. Because to me, you know, a lot of it, as I said to meeting to Mr. Forte, a lot of it is a no-brainer. You've got a tough, you know, you've got a tough road to hoe. You know, just from a personal perspective, I think Mr. Day and Mrs. Spardell just brought up some good points. If you want to really get going on that other stuff, you know, if you put it on, you know, that you really, you know, affects the, you know, the actual education portions of it. That's not to diminish sports, and it's not to diminish the music program. But if you're going to deal in the realm of what's immediately possible, you know, I think putting those other things up there, the other 4 points, you know, I think you would get a lot of support in the community. And once again, that's just my own personal opinion. And I think if people saw that there's still a problem, acknowledging you still have a problem with the field, you still got a DEP site up there, I think that portion of it, I think pretty much is going to have to be handled by the Board of Ed. What I think the council would be receptive to is your other, that's only one part of your problem, okay? It's, you know, whether or not you need something for the high school, something for the band program in terms of, you know, practice facility or whatever, or just the other high school programs that you run. You know, maybe there could be something done, you know, creatively to remediate that problem. That's what I sort of heard in informal conversations that I've had. People in the community and the sports associations, I'm not going to name somebody's name, but, you know, they've done a lot of research and they've really put a lot of thought that's impressed me in my conversations with them. I'm sure they've spoken to different, you know, folks on the board. So I think maybe the community is coming to the realization that we really have to do something. As a town, not just as a Board of Education, not just as a town council, you know, let's take a look at it and see, you know, keeping in mind that we're all under financial constraints. It's a tough time. I mean, the town is not rolling in dough, and you guys certainly are. And we do have a little more flexibility, granted, you know, in terms of passing budgets and putting a bond issue out there. We only have to get 4 people to say yes, basically, and not putting up for a vote. And that's a big difference when it comes to borrowing money. And, you know, you raised a very legitimate point about the interest rates are going, you know, more. So I would keep that in mind. If you get, at least if you get 3/4 of a loaf in March, where you can go out and bond at a much lower rate than if you wait to September, you know, to put the, you know, if you package everything, if it gets voted down, somebody will let it get voted down as a group in March, and then you go to September, well, you're still running around with that interest rate problem. That I think if you could get the 4 non-field things on the ballot in March, I think you had stand an excellent chance, you know, of getting that passed and getting an interest rate that's much more favorable than you would get waiting until September. But,
I have a question though. You had mentioned that the town might not be able to pay for the remediation, which would mean that would bring us back to a discussion that we have to include that in our own referendum to pay for it.
That's what comes.
yeah, I mean, the remediation issue is not, it's not a field use, as far as I'm concerned. This is once again my personal opinion. The remediation issue is something that is, you know, it's on a board of education piece of property. Okay. If you're talking about going forward in terms of utilization of recreation facilities and education field facilities, you know, there may be some way that we can come to a, you know, to an understanding of what, you know, of what needs to be done.
Essentially.
Excuse me?
Like the redevelopment at HPW.
Yeah.
Right.
Or even something with the lower field. I mean, someone mentioned, you know, that one of your options that I think is perfecting the lower field. Mr. Bolino very correctly points out that you also have an ongoing cost to that, though. Every 10 years or so, you're going to have to come up with roughly $400,000 to replace turf. We're going to run into the same problems on the town side. When I pointed out, well, you know, we put all these wonderful hilltop facilities up there. Centennial Field has been in there now 7 or 8 years. So probably within the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to have to come up with a $400,000 or so to re-turf Centennial Field. All of these wonderful new facilities that we're putting in on the hilltop, all turf, okay? But we're going to have to start budgeting for, you know, for replacement. That's just a fact of life. So you'll get more utilization out of them. But there's ongoing expenses to these things. You know, there's no ratables coming from these things. I mean, they're all of the benefits that you get, they're good for the kids, and they're subjective. You do attract people into the community who have children. You certainly want that. You want Verona to, you know, to be I would say, a kid-friendly or a child-friendly town. But keep in mind, and that's what the voters have to decide, how much do you want to pay for that? Okay, do you want 5 million, 10 million, you want to keep on, that's really the issue. And so going forward, Michael, I think to answer your question, we have to look at it, but the remediation thing, I don't think that's something that you're just going to have to decide, as a board here, whether you want to, whether you want to try to roll it into I know one of your things rolls it in, but I think the town is not in a position to deal with that. But we're talking about is going forward, with a plan to do some more shared usage of field facilities.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to clarify with Steve before, which was if you were 100% sure that everything in that 1.9, 1.6, whatever you call it, is right, then we would want to put that in now, because in order to go forward as a joint use, or I guess we could just not include it, right, and still go forward as joint use and solve this 16, 18 months from now. Still, it wouldn't really matter, essentially.
And Steve, I'm going to put you can correct me from when we were at one of the meetings that we attended. I mean, the remediation issue was not something I really got a consensus that, the town was interested in interjecting in that. I think the thrust was going forward, with maybe you helping with some of the other facilities, in terms of, the lower field, I think specifically was talked about, whether or not the town could
Yeah, I think it
use
was
that for
a partnership.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
We do the remediation, get it ready, and then the town will build the field park.
Yeah, and then, once again, it's an idea that's out there. There's been no, as John correctly pointed out, there's been no consensus on that, because quite frankly, the council hasn't met as a group since these meetings were discussed. Unfortunately, our last meeting was snowed out, so, I know there will be people from the community coming up to public participation and asking these questions, and I welcome them, to come up and try to see where everybody on the council is, in terms of going forward. The only thing at this point, I can speak for myself, and that's basically it. But thanks for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Come. Okay, we'll wrap this meeting up then. Any disagreement at this point? And got some food for thought for Tuesday night. It'd be good if we get for Tuesday what we have to decide once and for all Tuesday, and what bits of it do we have some latitude to change post Tuesday within the time frame for the election of March. Right, so if there's variability that we can put into a number, we agree on going forward on X, Y, and Z, but there's a variable there, a question needs to be answered, and we have that latitude, right? Okay, we'll wrap up tonight's, any other business that we need to discuss?
I just want to thank everybody for coming out on a Sunday afternoon. I think we had a lot of things you could do, and definitely we appreciate your support on the Board of Education.
We should move on, board meetings on Sundays, we've got the most intensive on Sundays so far, and Tuesday nights. Okay, our next meeting is going to be, of course, Tuesday night at 7 o'clock for a confidential hour, and then public session at 8 o'clock.